Tariffs, trade talks, and tensions. There's a lot stirring the grains and oilseeds markets right now, from stalled U.S.-China negotiations to renewed strikes in the Russia-Ukraine war zone. Volatility is back on the table. Add improving crop conditions and shifting global demand, and it's a lot for bulls and bears alike to navigate. I'm Johanna Bota, and with me today to break it all down is StoneX's VP of Clearing and Execution Sales, Bertrand Oesterle. Welcome, Bertrand. So let's start with your latest take on Trump tariffs and what impact does that have on oilseeds and grains?
So initially we have to look at the China-US trade tariff talks that you've just mentioned. They've stalled late last week, and that had an immediate impact on soybean that has seen some pressure from that trade talk not going anywhere. So Trump has put some tantrums out again, saying China is not playing the game, they're not respecting the deal. We didn't know there was a deal though. And basically he's referring to the fact that China is not re-establishing the exports of rare earth.
Right.
Now, China is not in a hurry. China has seen that Trump is being challenged on its own soil by its own courts, so therefore they've got the cards in hand. However, we've seen this week a bit of a change in discussions. There may be a telephone phone call between President Trump and President Xi. So therefore, soybean has gained back a little bit on that hope of potential talks. So it's been down, up on whether there are or aren't any talks. The interesting bit for soybean also is the fact that we still don't have an EPA decision. And so while we're waiting for that, it's been about those tariffs.
Okay. What about Ukraine and Russia? Because last week we were mentioning that it was still very much a headline risk. Has this become a factor again?
So it does indeed. So we've seen two more elements coming into soybean as the Iran and US talks about nuclear deals are still going on. So there's been either spillover pressure or spillover support into oilseeds. And as you mentioned, the Ukrainian-Russian story has come to the forefront once again. So we've had the second talks about a potential ceasefire. And before that second round of ceasefire talks, both sides have tried to flex muscles. Russia has bombed Kiev a lot more. The Ukraine has managed to bomb Russia very much inland, and also has poked the bear even more by going into attacking the bridges that go to Crimea once again.
Yeah.
So for us in grains and oilseed, that becomes a little bit more important because the Russians have stopped the maritime movement in and around Sevastopol. It's still very far away from Odessa or Novozorsk, which are the two main Ukrainian and Russian deep sea ports on the Black Sea. But it becomes a headline risk in case we get a hit on those two ports.
Right.
So we still need to monitor the headlines from that front of view. And also, it is creating some uneasiness for the recent shorts. So some recent specs who recently added to their shorts have seen those positions being vulnerable to that headline risk. Now, there's been a bit of a division between the types of shorts we're dealing with. Those who are recent and vulnerable, and those who have been there for 3-4 months and who are structural shorts. So we've seen the trade looking at those bounces and seeing at the OI if there is an impact on those recent shorts and accompanying any downside again. So we've mentioned SEPDEC in Paris Wheat for the past few weeks, and it becomes like a gauge to what we're doing with the specs. If the SEPDEC is not moving much, like it hasn't recently, we've remained between -12 and -10.5, then the view is that the spec roll is not yet taking place. We still have some 270,000 fund short in Paris. And as long as we don't have an indication that the spec roll is taking place, then when we see a bounce, it's recent specs which are being flushed out, and the trade is accompanying it to the downside once again.
So last week you mentioned this, and are you saying this again, that despite all the headline risks, that the markets are still selling into the rallies? And if so, what's driving that?
So we still had some decent fundamental news over the week, despite the geopolitical elements. We've had some crop conditions that were pretty good overall. If we mention the US to start with, the winter wheat conditions have improved by 2% in terms of good to excellent ratings compared to the previous week, so with 52% good to excellent. In spring wheat, we've improved by 5% with 50% good to excellent. In corn, we've improved by 1%, 69%. And we've had the first crop rating for good to excellent levels for soybean at 67%, which is 1% better than the 5-year average. And if we look at Europe, it has been raining in parts of Europe. If I look at the French crop ratings, they're 70% good to excellent, up from 61% the previous year. Then if we go to the Black Sea area, Ukraine has had a really fast planting of spring crops. The corn area is almost completely planted. It's very close to the 3.9 to 4 million hectare area. If we look elsewhere, the Argentine are harvesting quite quickly in corn. They're halfway through. In soybean, there's some 80-85% harvested, and in wheat, they're 10.5% to 11% planted already. Canada has had some good planting progress as well. And if we look at Brazil is starting to harvest its second corn crop, and that second corn crop is only just 2% harvested, but it means that there is a choice now for some consumers to switch origin from the US to the Brazilians. And the analyst estimates we've seen over the past week indicate that the yields might be better than initially anticipated, and we've seen those estimates of second corn crop in Brazil going up by 2 to 4 million tons over the past week. And finally, to add on to the bear element, the Indians are confirming what the USDA was telling us. So I'm still a bit dubious.
Okay.
The USDA was saying that India would produce something like 117 million tons. The Indian Agricultural Ministry is even more optimistic, 117.5 million tons of wheat. That's for the new crop. And that's way beyond the 113.3 million tons they've just harvested, which is already a record. So it would be a new potential record.
Okay, let's wrap it all up then. What are the hopes for the bulls out there, and what should we keep an eye on?
So the bulls are still trying to put some elements out, and the bears have been trying to destroy those elements one by one, and we've seen the bears gaining the upper hand over the past few weeks. But the bears have been telling us, for example, that France cannot sell to its traditional markets. It can't sell to Morocco because the Americans are selling there, can't sell to Algeria because there's a political issue, can't sell to Egypt because the Americans and the Russians are selling there. Well, we had a little bit of a surprise on that front. The Egyptian importing agency, Mostabal Mizar, bought 180,000 tons of French wheat in April.
Okay.
So that's interesting because it shows that Egypt, despite having a good procurement process at present, it's 3.64 million tons of domestic wheat already procured, is still looking at alternatives to Russia, either from a scare point of view from April when we were talking about the frost issue, or maybe from a war issue again. And again, the Ukraine-Russia war intensifying once again, it would bring headlines, and that could provide some momentum for further short covering.
Okay.
In the Black Sea, what we've seen also is lower estimates for Ukraine. So in wheat, we would be losing some wheat exports. So the current wheat export quota is 16.2 million tons for this current crop. For next crop, it's estimated at about 15.5. And in corn, the production this past season was 27 million tons. The new crop would be about 26 million tons. So we lose some momentum out of disponibilities out of Ukraine.
What about the WASDE report that's coming out on June 12th?
So June 12th would be interesting from a WASDE point of view because we're going to look at China. So we've been mentioning the Chinese story for the past few weeks. It has been very hot in China, and the bulls are saying that it's not the end of the story. We're getting some articles on Bloomberg and Reuters today that are still quite alarming, saying that some areas have lost 10 to 50% in yields, that the harvest is very quick and very early because it is harvesting a lower yielding crop. And the bears are saying nonsense. That crop is being harvested because it is a crop that has had a finning state that was pre-heat, and therefore it hasn't been that much affected. So what's going to be interesting is to see what the USDA is going to do with those conflicting opinions. Is it going to look at waiting another month, which I think is going to happen? They're probably going to not change anything in June. They might wait July. But if they are wanting to change something in June, it might be those estimates we've seen from private analysts of a drop of 3.5 to 10 million tons in production.
Okay.
And that could intrinsically feed into the world stocks.
Okay.
And the last element we will be looking at is some development on the EU-Ukrainian side as well. We've had some political movement where the EU is putting back some taxes on imports of Ukrainian agricultural products. And Ukraine is replying in two ways. They're saying that they're going to try to speak to the EU and try to find a solution by the end of July. And if it doesn't come to that, they will look to develop their own food processing capabilities in order to capture the added value.
Why is the EU doing that?
Well, we have seen it in the past before. There's been an awful lot of demonstrations and farmer unhappiness in Europe because there's a lot of Ukrainian products coming into the EU. And it's a way to say, well, we've held the EU for, we have Ukraine, I should say, for a certain amount of time during the war effort. We're coming to a point where there might be a peace element. Do we really need this EU imports? We might put the taxes back on. So it's a little bit of internal politics in the EU to try to show to farmers that
there's no preferential treatment.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's hope for a peace deal soon. Thank you, Bertrand. And thank you for watching. For more financial content like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel.